The Secret Doctrine by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, a facsimile of the original edition of 1888, printed by the Cunningham Press, Alhambra, California. Volume 1, Cosmogenesis. Part 1, Cosmic Evolution, 7 stanzas translated with commentaries from the Secret Book of John. Stanza 7. This is sloka 1. Behold the beginning of sentient formless life. First the divine vehicle, the one from the mother spirit, Atman. Then the spiritual, Atma Buddhi, spirit soul. Again the 3 from the 1, the 4 from the 1, and the 5, from which the 3, the 5, and the 7. These are the threefold and the fourfold downward, the mind-born sons of the first Lord, Avalokiteshvara, the shining 7, the builders. It is they who are thou, me, him, Ulanu, they who watch over thee and thy mother, Bhumi, the earth. Behold the beginning of sentient formless life. The hierarchy of creative powers is divided into 7, or 4 and 3, esoteric, within the 12 great orders recorded in the 12 signs of the zodiac. The 7 of the manifesting scale being connected, moreover, with the 7 planets. All this is subdivided into numberless groups of divine, spiritual, semi-spiritual, and ethereal beings. The chief hierarchies among these are hinted at in the Great Quaternary, or the 4 bodies and the 3 faculties of Brahma, exoterically, and the Panchasyam, the 5 Brahmas, or the 5 Jnani Buddhas in the Buddhist system. The highest group is composed of the divine flames, so-called, also spoken of as the fiery lions and the lions of life, whose esotericism is securely hidden in the zodiacal sign of Leo. It is the nucleoli of the superior divine world. See commentary in first pages of Addendum. They are the formless fiery breaths, identical in one aspect with the upper sephirothal triad, which is placed by the Cabalists in the archetypal world. The same hierarchy, with the same numbers, is found in the Japanese system in the beginnings, as taught by both the Shinto and the Buddhist sects. In this system, anthropogenesis precedes cosmogenesis, as the divine merges into the human and creates, midway in its descent into matter, the visible universe. The legendary personages remarks reverentially Omuai, having to be understood as the stereotyped embodiment of the higher secret doctrine and its sublime truths. To state it at full length, however, would occupy too much of our space, but a few words on this old system cannot be out of place. The following is a short synopsis of this anthropo-cosmogenesis, and it shows how closely the most separated notions echoed one and the same archaic teaching. When all was as yet chaos, Konton, 3 spiritual beings appeared on the stage of future creation. 1. Amino Ani Nakanushi no Kami, divine monarch of the central heaven. 2. Takamyon Shibi no Kami, exalted imperial divine offspring of heaven and the earth. And 3. Kamumi no Subi no Kami, offspring of the gods simply. These were without form or substance, our Arupa triad, as neither the celestial nor the terrestrial substance had yet differentiated, nor had the essence of things been formed. In the Zohar, which, as now arranged and re-edited by Moses de Leon with the help of Syrian and Chaldean Christian Gnostics in the 13th century, and corrected and revised still later by many Christian hands, is only a little less exoteric than the Bible itself. This divine vehicle no longer appears as it does in the Chaldean Book of Numbers. True enough, Ein Sof, the absolute endless no-thing, uses also the form of the One, the manifested heavenly man, the first cause, as its chariot, Merkaba in Hebrew, Vahan in Sanskrit, or vehicle to descend into and manifest through in the phenomenal world. But the Kabbalists neither make it plain how the Absolute can use anything or exercise any attribute whatsoever, since, as the Absolute, it is devoid of attributes. Nor do they explain that in reality it is the first cause, Plato's Logos, the original and eternal idea, that manifests through Adman Kadmon, the second logos, so to speak. In the Book of Numbers it is explained that En, or Ein, Ayor, is the only self-existent, whereas its depth, Bythos or Buton, of the Gnostics, called Propator, is only periodical. The latter is Brahma, as differentiated from Brahma or Par-Brahm. It is the depth, the source of light, or Propator, which is the unmanifested logos in the abstract idea, and not Ein Sof, whose ray uses Adman Kadmon, or the manifested logos, the objective universe, quote, male and female, unquote, as a chariot through which to manifest. But in the Zohar we read the following incongruity: Senior occultatus est et absconditus, microprosopus manifestus est et non manifestus. Rosenroth, Liber Mysteri 4:1. This is a fallacy, since microprosopus, or the microcosm, can only exist during its manifestations, and is destroyed during the Mahapralayas. Rosenroth's Kabbalah is no guide, but very often a puzzle. First, the divine vehicle. As in the Japanese system, in the Egyptian, and every old cosmogony, at this divine flame, the one are lit the three descending groups. Having their potential being in the higher group, they now become distinct and separate entities. These are called the Virgins of Life, the Great Illusion, etc., etc., and collectively the six-pointed star. The latter is the symbol in almost every religion of the Logos as the first emanation. It is that of Vishnu in India, the chakra or wheel, and the glyph of the tetragrammaton, the he of the four letters, or metaphorically the limbs of microprosopus in the Kabbalah, which are 10 and 6, respectively. The later Kabbalists, however, especially their Christian mystics, have played sad havoc with this magnificent symbol. Note: indeed, the microprosopus, who is, philosophically speaking, quite distinct from the unmanifested eternal Logos, one with the Father, has been finally brought, by centuries of incessant efforts of sophistry and paradoxes, to be considered as one with Jehovah, or the one living God, whereas Jehovah is no better than Bina, a female Sephiroth. This fact cannot be too frequently impressed upon the reader. End of note. For the 10 limbs of the heavenly man are the 10 Sephiroth, but the first heavenly man is the unmanifested spirit of the universe, and ought never to be degraded into a microprosopus, the lesser face or countenance, the prototype of man on the terrestrial plane. Note: the microprosopus is, as just said, the Logos manifested, and of such there are many. End of note. Of this, however, later on, the six-pointed star refers to the 6 forces or powers of nature, the 6 planes, principles, etc., etc., all synthesized by the 7th, or the central point in the star. All these, the upper and lower hierarchies included, emanate from the heavenly or celestial Virgin, the Great Mother in all religions, the androgyne, the Sephira Adman Kadmon. Note: Sephira is the crown, Kether, in the abstract principle only, as a mathematical X, the unknown quantity. On the plane of a differentiated nature, she is the female counterpart of Adman Kadmon, the first androgyne. The Kabbalah teaches that the word fiat lux, from Genesis chapter 1, refer to the formation and evolution of the Sephiroth, and not to light as opposed to darkness. Rabbi Simeon says, O companions, companions, man as an emanation was both man and woman, Adman Kadmon verily, and this is the sense of the words, let there be light, and it was light. And this is the twofold man. Auzuge aus dem Zohar, pages 13 to 15, end of note. In its unity, primordial light is the 7th or highest principle, Daivi Prakriti, the light of the unmanifested Logos. but in its differentiation it becomes Fohat, or the 7 suns. The former is symbolized by the central point in the double triangle, the latter by the hexagon itself, or the 6 limbs of the microprosopus, the 7th being Malkut, the bride of the Christian Kabbalists, or our earth. Hence the expressions, the first after the one is divine fire, the second fire and aether, the third is composed of fire, aether, and water, the fourth of fire, aether, water, and air. Note, see next footnote, these elements of fire, air, etc. are not our compound elements. End of note. The one is not concerned with man-bearing globes, but with the inner invisible spheres. The firstborn are the life, the heart and pulse of the universe. The second are its mind, or consciousness, as said in the commentary. Note, this consciousness has no relation to our consciousness. The consciousness of the one manifested, if not absolute, is still unconditioned. Mahat, the universal mind, is the first production of the Brahma creator, but also of the pradhana, undifferentiated matter. End of note. The one from the mother spirit, Atman, then the spiritual, Atma Buddhi, spirit soul. Note, this relates to the cosmic principles. End of note. The second order of celestial beings, those of fire and aether, corresponding to spirit and soul, or the Atma Buddhi, whose names are legion, are still formless but more definitely substantial. They are the first differentiation in the secondary evolution, or creation, a misleading word. As the name shows, they are the prototypes of the incarnating jivas or monads, and are composed of the fiery spirit of life. It is through these that passes, like a pure solar beam, the ray which is furnished by them with its future vehicle, the divine soul, Buddhi. These are directly concerned with the host of the high world of our system. From these twofold units emanate the threefold. In the cosmogony of Japan, when, out of the chaotic mass, an egg-like nucleus appears, having within itself the germ and potency of all the universal as well as of all terrestrial life, it is the threefold just named which differentiates. The male ethereal, Yo, principle, ascends, and the female, grosser or more material principle, is precipitated into the universe of substance, when a separation occurs between the celestial and the terrestrial. From this the female, the mother, the first rudimentary objective being, is born. It is ethereal, without form or sex, and yet it is from this and the mother that the 7 divine spirits are born, from whom will emanate these 7 creations, just as in the Codex Nazareus from Carabtanos and the Mother Spiritus, the 7 evilly disposed, that is material, spirits are born. It would be too long to give here the Japanese names, but once translated they stand in this order. 1. The invisible celibate, which is the creative logos of the non-creating Father, or the creative potentiality of the latter made manifest. 2. The spirit, or the god of the rayless depths of chaos, which becomes differentiated matter, or the world stuff, also the mineral realm. 3. The spirit of the vegetable kingdom, of the abundant vegetation. 4. This one is of dual nature, being at the same time the spirit of the earth and the spirit of the sands, the former containing the potentiality of the male element, the latter that of the female element, the two forming a combined nature. These two were one, yet unconscious of being two. In this duality were contained A, the male, dark and muscular being, Itunogai no Kami, and B, Ekugai no Kami, the female, fair and weaker or more delicate being. Then the 5th and 6th spirits, who were androgynous or dual-sexed, and finally 7, the 7th spirit, the last emanated from the mother, appears as the first divine human form, distinctly male and female. It was the seventh creation, as in the Puranas, wherein man is the seventh creation of Brahma. These Tsanagi Tsanami descended into the universe by the celestial bridge, the Milky Way, and Tsanagi, perceiving far below a chaotic mass of cloud and water, thrust his jeweled spear into the depths, and dry land appeared. Then the two separated to explore Onokoro, the newly created island world, etc., etc. Omui. Such are the Japanese exoteric fables, the end that conceals the kernel of the same one truth of the secret doctrine. Turning back to the esoteric explanations in every cosmogony, the three from the one. The third order corresponds to the Atma Buddhimanas, spirit, soul, and intellect, and is called the triads. The four from the one. The fourth are substantial entities. This is the highest group among the rupas, atomic forms. Note, it is worthy to notice that, while rejecting as a superstition of occultism, and religion too, the theory of substantial and invisible beings called angels, elementals, etc., without of course having ever looked into the philosophy of these incorporeal entities or thought over them, modern chemistry, owing to observation and discovery, should have unconsciously been forced to adopt and recognize the same ratio of progression and order in the evolution of chemical atoms as occultism does, both for its dionys and atoms, analogy being the first law. As seen above, the very first group of the Rupa angels is quaternary, an element being added to each in descending order. So are the atoms, adopting the phraseology of chemistry, monatomic, diatomic, and tetratomic, progressing downwards. Let it be remembered that fire, water, and air, or the elements of a primary creation, so-called, are not the compound elements they are on earth, but noumenal homogeneous elements, the spirits thereof. Then follow the septenary groups or hosts. Placed on parallel lines in a diagram with atoms, the natures of those beings would be seen to correspond in their downward scale of progression to composite elements in a mathematically identical manner, as to analogy. This refers, of course, only to diagrams made by the occultists, for were the scale of angelic beings to be placed on a parallel line with the scale of the chemical atoms of science, from the hypothetical helium down to uranium, they would of course be found to differ. For these have, as correspondents on the astral plane, only the four lowest orders, the higher three principles in the atom, or rather molecule or chemical element, being perceptible only to the initiated Dangma's eye. But then, if chemistry desired to find itself on the right path, it would have to correct its tabular arrangement by that of the occultists, which it may refuse to do. In esoteric philosophy, every physical particle corresponds to, and depends on, its higher noumenon, the being to whose essence it belongs. And above as below, the spiritual evolves from the divine, the psychomental from the spiritual, tainted from its lower plane by the astral, the whole animate and seemingly inanimate nature, evolving on parallel lines, and drawing its attributes from above as well as from below. End of note. It is the nursery of the human, conscious, spiritual souls. They are called the imperishable jivas, and constitute, through the order below their own, the first group of the septenary host, the great mystery of human conscious and intellectual being. Note, the number 7 does not imply only 7 entities, but 7 groups or hosts, as explained before. The highest group, the Asuras, born in Brahma's first body, which turned into night, are septenary, that is, divided like the Pitris into 7 classes, 3 of which are arupa, bodiless, and 4 with bodies. See Vishnu Purana, Book 1. They are in fact more truly our Pitris, ancestors, than the Pitris who projected the first physical man. See Book 2. End of note. For the latter are the field wherein lies concealed in its privation the germ that will fall into generation. The germ will become the spiritual potency in the physical cell that guides the development of the embryo, and which is the cause of the hereditary transmission of faculties and all the inherent qualities in man. The Darwinian theory, however, of the transmission of acquired faculties is neither taught nor accepted in occultism. Evolution in it proceeds on quite other lines. The physical, according to esoteric teaching, evolving gradually from the spiritual, mental, and psychic. This inner soul of the physical cell, this spiritual plasm that dominates the germinal plasm, is the key that must open one day the gates of the terra incognita of the biologists, now called the dark mystery of embryology. See text and note, info. And the 5. The 5th group is a very mysterious one, as it is connected with the microcosmic pentagon, the 5-pointed star representing man. In India and Egypt, these Dhyanis were connected with a crocodile, and their abode is in Capricornus. These are convertible terms in Indian astrology, as this 10th sign of the zodiac is called Makara, loosely translated crocodile. The word itself is occultly interpreted in various ways, as will be shown further on. In Egypt, the defunct man, whose symbol is the pentagram or the 5-pointed star, the points of which represent the limbs of a man, was shown emblematically transformed into a crocodile. Sebak, or Sevek, or seventh, as Mr. Gerald Massey says, showing it as having been the type of intelligence, is a dragon in reality, not a crocodile. He is the dragon of wisdom, or manas, the human soul, mind, the intelligent principle, called in our esoteric philosophy the 5th principle. Says the defunct Orisified in chapter 88 of Book of the Dead, or the ritual, under the glyph of a mummiform god with a crocodile's head. 1. I am the god crocodile proceeding at the fear, at the arrival of his soul among men. I am the god crocodile brought for destruction, an allusion to the destruction of divine spiritual purity when man acquires the knowledge of good and evil, also to the fallen gods or angels of every theogony. 2. I am the fish of the great Horus, as Makara is the crocodile, the vehicle of Varuna. I am merged in Sekten. This last sentence given the corroboration of and repeats the doctrine of esoteric Buddhism, for it alludes directly to the 5th principle, manas, or the most spiritual part of its essence rather, which merges into, is absorbed by, and made one with the Atma Buddhi after the death of man. For Sekin is the residence or loka of the god Kem, Horus, Osiris, or father and son, hence the Devakan of Atma Buddhi. In the ritual of the dead, the defunct is shown entering into Sekhem with Horus thought, and emerging from it as pure spirit. 64, verse 29. Thus the defunct says, verse 130, I see the forms of myself as various men transforming eternally. I know this chapter. He who knows it takes all kinds of living forms. And in verse 35, addressing in magic formula that which is called in Egyptian esotericism the ancestral heart, or the reincarnating principle, the permanent ego, the defunct says, O my heart, my ancestral heart, necessary for my transformations, do not separate thyself from me before the guardian of the scales. Thou art my personality within my breast, divine companion watching over my flesh's bodies. It is in Sekhem that lies concealed the mysterious face, or the real man concealed under the false personality, the triple crocodile of Egypt, the symbol of the higher trinity or human triad, Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. Note, one of the explanations of the real, though hidden meaning of this Egyptian religious glyph is easy. The crocodile is the first to await and meet the devouring fires of the morning sun, and very soon came to personify the solar heat. When the sun arose, it was like the arrival on earth and among men of the divine soul which informs the gods. Hence the strange symbolism. The mummy donned the head of a crocodile to show that it was a soul arriving from the earth. End of note. In all the ancient papyri, the crocodile is called Sebek, seventh, while the water is the fifth principle esoterically. And as already stated, Mr. Gerald Massey shows that the crocodile was the seventh soul, the supreme one of seven, the seer unseen. Even exoterically, Sekhem is the residence of the god Kem, and Kem is Horus avenging the death of his father Osiris, hence punishing the sins of man when he becomes a disembodied soul. Thus the defunct Osirified became the god Kem, who gleans the field of Anuru. That is, he gleans either his reward or punishment, as that field is the celestial locality, Devakan, where the defunct is given wheat, the food of divine justice. The fifth group of the celestial beings is supposed to contain in itself the dual attributes of both the spiritual and physical aspects of the universe, the two poles, so to say, of Mahat, the universal intelligence, and the dual nature of man, the spiritual and the physical. Hence its number 5, multiplied and made into 10, connecting it with Makara, the 10th sign of zodiac, from which the 3, the 5, and the 7. The 6th and 7th groups partake of the lower qualities of the quaternary. They are conscious, ethereal entities, as invisible as ether, which are shot out like the boughs of a tree from the first central group of the 4, and shoot out in their turn numberless side groups, the lower of which are the nature spirits, or elementals of countless kinds and varieties, from the formless and unsubstantial, the ideal thoughts of their creators, down to the atomic, though to human perception, invisible organisms. The latter are considered as the spirits of atoms, for they are the first remove backwards from the physical atom, sentient if not intelligent creatures. They are all subject to karma, and have to work it out through every cycle. For, as the Doctrine teaches, there are no such privileged beings in the universe, whether in our or in other systems, in the outer or the inner worlds, as the angels of the Western religion and the Judean. Note: a world, when called a high world, is not high by reason of its location, but because it is superior in quality or essence. Yet such a world is generally understood by the profane as heaven, and located above our heads. End of note. A Dian Kochan has to become one. He cannot be born or appear suddenly on the plane of life as a full-blown angel. The celestial hierarchy of the present Manvantara will find itself transferred in the next cycle of life into higher superior worlds, and will make room for a new hierarchy composed of the elect ones of our mankind. Being is an endless cycle within the one absolute eternity, wherein move numberless inner cycles, finite and conditioned, would evince no personal merit in being gods. Such a class of beings, perfect only by virtue of the special, immaculate nature inherent in them, in the face of suffering and struggling humanity, and even of the lower creation, would be the symbol of an eternal injustice, quite satanic in character, an ever-present crime. It is an anomaly and an impossibility in nature. Therefore the 4 and the 3 have to incarnate as all other beings have. This sixth group, moreover, remains almost inseparable from man, who draws from it all but his highest and lowest principles, or his spirit and body, the 5 middle human principles being the very essence of those dhyānis. Note: Paracelsus calls them the Phlegi, the Christians, the guardian angels, the occultist, the ancestors, the Pitris. They are the sixfold Dhyan Kochans, having the 6 spiritual elements in the composition of their bodies, in fact, men minus the physical body. End of note. Alone the divine ray, the Atman, proceeds directly from the One. When asked how that can be, how is it possible to conceive that those, quote, gods, unquote, or angels, can be at the same time their own emanations and their personal selves? Is it in the same sense in the material world, where the Son is, in one way, his Father, being his blood, the bone of his bone, and the flesh of his flesh? To this the teachers answer, verily it is so, but one has to go deep into the mystery of being before one can fully comprehend this truth. Stanza 7 continued. 2. The one ray multiplies the smaller rays. Life precedes form, and life survives the last atom of form, sthula sharira, external body. Through the countless rays, the life ray, the one, like a thread through many beads, pearls. This sloka expresses the conception, a purely Vedantic one, as already explained elsewhere, of a life thread, sutratma, running through successive generations. How then can this be explained? By resorting to a simile, to a familiar illustration, though necessarily imperfect, as all our available analogies must be. Before resorting to it, however, I would ask whether it seems unnatural, least of all supernatural, to any one of us when we consider that process known as the growth and development of a fetus into a healthy baby weighing several pounds evolves from what? From the segmentation of an infinitesimally small ovum and a spermatozoon, and afterwards we see that baby develop into a 6-foot man. This refers to the atomic and physical expansion of the microscopically small into something very large, from the to the naked eye unseen, into the visible and objective. Science has provided for all this, and I dare say her theories, embryological, biological, and physiological, are correct enough so far as exact observation of the material goes. Nevertheless, the 2 chief difficulties of the science of embryology, namely what are the forces at work in the formation of the fetus, and the cause of, quote, hereditary transmission, unquote, of likeness, physical, moral, or mental, have never been properly answered, nor will they ever be solved till the day when scientists condescend to accept the occult theories. Note: the materialists and the evolutionists of the Darwinian school would be ill-advised to accept the newly worked-out theories of Professor Weizmann, the author of Beiträge zur Deszendenslehre, with regard to one of the 2 mysteries of embryology as above specified, which he seems to have solved, as he thinks. For when it is solved, science will have stepped over into the domain of the truly occult, and stepped forever out of the realm of transformation, as taught by Darwin. The 2 are irreconcilable from the standpoint of materialism. Regarded from that of the occultists, it solves all these mysteries. Those who are not acquainted with the new discovery of Professor Weizmann, at one time a fervent Darwinist, ought to hasten to repair the deficiency. The German embryologist philosopher shows, thus stepping over the heads of the Greek hypocrites and Aristotle, right back into the teachings of the old Aryans, one infinitesimal cell out of millions of others at work in the formation of an organism, determining alone and unaided by means of constant segmentation and multiplication the correct image of the future man or animal in its physical, mental, and psychic characteristics. It is that cell which impresses on the face and form of the new individual the features of the parents or of some distant ancestor. It is that cell again which transmits to him the intellectual and mental idiosyncrasies of his sires, and so on. This plasma is the immortal portion of our bodies simply through the process of successive assimilations. Darwin's theory, viewing the embryological cell as an essence or the extract from all other cells, is set aside. It is incapable of accounting for hereditary transmission. There are but two ways of explaining the mystery of heredity. Either the substance of the germinal cell is endowed with the faculty of crossing the whole cycle of transformations that lead to the construction of a separate organism, and then to the reproduction of identical germinal cells, or those germinal cells do not have their genesis at all in the body of the individual, but proceed directly from the ancestral germinal cell passed from father to son through long generations. It is the latter hypothesis that Weismann accepted and has worked upon, and it is to this cell he traces the immortal portion of man. So far so good, and when this almost correct theory is accepted, how will biologists explain the first appearance of this everlasting cell? Unless man grew like the immortal Topsy and was not born at all, but fell from the clouds, how was that embryological cell born in him? End of note. But if this physical phenomenon astonishes no one, except in so far as it puzzles the embryologists, why should our intellectual and inner growth, the evolution of the human spiritual to the divine spiritual, be regarded as, or seem, more impossible than the other? Now to the simile. Complete the physical plasm mentioned in the last footnote, the germinal cell of man with all its material potentialities, with the spiritual plasm, so to say, or the fluid that contains the 5 lower principles of the 6-principled Dian, and you have the secret, if you are spiritual enough to understand it. When the seed of the animal man is cast into the soil of the animal woman, that seed cannot germinate unless it has been fructified by the 5 virtues, the fluid of, or the emanation from the principles of the 6-fold heavenly man. Wherefore the microcosm is represented as a pentagon within the hexagon star, the macrocosm. From Anthropos, a work on occult embryology, Book 1. Then functions of jiva on this earth of 5-fold character. In the mineral atom it is connected with the lowest principles of the spirits of the earth, the 6-fold dhyanis. In the vegetable particle, with the second, the prana, life. In the animal, with all these, plus the 3rd and the 4th. In man, the germ must receive the fruition of all the 5. Otherwise he will be born no higher than an animal, namely, a congenital idiot. Thus in man alone the jiva is complete. As to his 7th principle, it is but one of the beams of the universal sun. Each rational creature receives only the temporary loan of that which has to return to its source, while his physical body is shaped by the lowest terrestrial lives through physical, chemical, and physiological evolution. The blessed ones have naught to do with the purgations of matter. Kabbalah, Chaldean Book of Numbers. It comes to this. Mankind, in its first prototypal, shadowy form, is the offspring of the Elohim of life, or Pitris. In the qualitative and physical aspect, it is the direct progeny of the ancestors, the lowest dhyanis, or spirits of the earth. For its moral, psychic, and spiritual nature, it is indebted to a group of divine beings, the name and characteristics of which will be given in Book 2. Collectively, men are the handiwork of hosts of various spirits, distributively the tabernacles of those hosts, and occasionally and singly the vehicles of some of them. In our present all-material 5th race, the earthly spirit of the 4th is still strong in us, but we are approaching the time when the pendulum of evolution will direct its swing decidedly upwards, bringing humanity back on a parallel line with the primitive third root race in spirituality. During its childhood, mankind was composed wholly of that angelic host, who were the indwelling spirits that animated the monstrous and gigantic tabernacles of clay of the fourth race, built by, as they are now also, and composed of countless myriads of lives. Note: science, dimly perceiving the truth, may find bacteria and other infinitesimals in the human body, and see in them but occasional and abnormal visitors to which diseases are attributed. Occultism, which discerns a life in every atom and molecule, whether in a mineral or human body, in air, fire, or water, affirms that our whole body is built of such lives, the smallest bacteria under the microscope being to them in comparative size like an elephant to the tiniest infusoria. End of note. This sentence will be explained later on in the present commentary. The tabernacles have improved in texture and symmetry of form, growing and developing with the globe that bore them, but the physical improvement took place at the expense of the spiritual inner man and nature. The three middle principles in earth and man became with every race more material, the soul stepping back to make room for the physical intellect, the essence of elements becoming the material and composite elements now known. Man is not, nor could he ever be, the complete product of the Lord God, but he is the child of the Elohim, so arbitrarily changed into the singular masculine gender. The first Dionys, commissioned to, quote, create, unquote, man in their image, could only throw off their shadows like a delicate model for the nature spirits of matter to work upon. See Book 2. Man is, beyond any doubt, formed physically out of the dust of the earth, but his creators and fashioners were many. Nor can it be said that the Lord God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, unless that God is identified with the one life, omnipresent though invisible, and unless the same operation is attributed to God on behalf of every living soul, or nephesh, which is the vital soul, not the divine spirit or ruach, which ensures to man alone a divine degree of immortality that no animal as such could ever attain in this cycle of incarnation. It is the inadequate distinctions made by the Jews and now by our Western metaphysicians, who, not knowing of and being unable to understand, hence to accept, more than a triune man, spirit, soul, and body, thus confuse the breath of life with immortal spirit. Note: the learned and very philosophical author of New Aspects of Life would impress upon his reader that the Nefesh Kayach, living soul, according to the Hebrews, proceeded from, or what produced by, the infusion of the spirit of breath of life into the quickening body of man, and was to supersede and take the place of that spirit in the thus constituted self, so that the spirit passed into, was lost sight of, and disappeared in the living soul. The human body, he thinks, ought to be viewed as a matrix in which and from which the soul, which he seems to place higher than the spirit, is developed, considered functionally, and from the standpoint of activity. The soul stands undeniably high in this finite and conditioned world of Maya. The soul, he says, is ultimately produced from the animated body of man. Thus the author identifies spirit, Atma, simply with the breath of life. The Eastern occultist will demur to this statement, for it is based on the erroneous conception that prana and atma or jivatma are one and the same thing. The author supports the argument by showing that with the ancient Hebrews, Greeks, and even Latins, ruach, pneuma, and spiritus, which the Jews undeniably, and with the Greeks and Romans very probably, meant wind. The Greek word animos, wind, and the Latin anima, soul, having a suspicious relation. This is very far-fetched. A legitimate battlefield for deciding this question is hardly to be found, since Mr. Pratt seems to be a practical, matter-of-fact metaphysician, a kind of Cabalist positivist, and the Eastern metaphysicians, especially the Vedantians, are all idealists. The occultists are also of the extreme esoteric Vedantian school, and they call the one life Parabrahm, the great breath and the whirlwind. But they disconnect the seventh principle entirely from matter or any relation to or connection with it. End of note. This applies also directly to the Protestant theologians who, in translating verse 8 of chapter 3 in the fourth Gospel, have entirely perverted the meaning. Indeed, the verse is made to say, "The wind bloweth where it listeth," instead of "the Spirit goeth where it willeth," as in the original and also in the translation of the Greek Eastern Church. Thus the philosophy of psychic, spiritual, and mental relations with man's physical functions is in almost inextricable confusion. Neither the old Aryan nor the Egyptian psychology are now properly understood, nor can they be assimilated without accepting the esoteric septenary, or at any rate the Vedantic quinquipartite division of the human inner principles, failing which it will be forever impossible to understand the metaphysical and purely psychic and even physiological relations between the Dayankochans, or angels, on the one plane, and humanity on the other. No Eastern Aryan esoteric works are so far published, but we possess the Egyptian papyri, which speak clearly of the seven principles of the seven souls of man. Note: Vide in Part 2, Book 2, The Seven Souls of Man, the divisions made respectively by Monsieur Gerald Massey and Franz Lambert. End of note. The Book of the Dead gives a complete list of the transformations that every defunct undergoes, while divesting himself, one by one, of all those principles, materialized for the sake of clearness into ethereal entities or bodies. We must, moreover, remind those who try to prove that the ancient Egyptian knew nothing of and did not teach reincarnation, that the, quote, soul, unquote, the ego, or self, of the defunct is said to be living in eternity. It is immortal, coeval with and disappearing with the solar boat, that is, for the cycle of necessity. This, quote, soul, unquote, emerges from the Tiao, the realm of the course of life, and joins the living on earth by day, to return to Tiao every night. This expresses the periodical existences of the ego. See Book of the Dead, 143. The shadow, the astral form, is annihilated, devoured by the Uraeus, verse 51. The manes will be annihilated. The two twins, the fourth and the fifth principle, will be scattered, but the soul bird, the divine swallow, and the Uraeus of flame, Manas and Atma Buddhi, will live in the eternity, for they are their mother's husbands. Note another suggestive analogy between the Aryan, or Brahminical, and the Egyptian esotericism. The former call the Pitris the lunar ancestors of men, and the Egyptians made of the moon god Tat Esmun, the first human ancestor. This, quote, moon god, unquote, expressed the seven nature powers that were prior to himself, and were summed up in him as his seven souls, of which he was the manifester as the eighth one, hence the eighth sphere. The seven rays of the Chaldean heptakis, or Yao on the Gnostic stones, indicate the same septenary of souls. The first form of the mystical seven was seen to be figured in heaven by the seven large stars of the Great Bear, the constellation assigned by the Egyptians to the Mother of Time and of the seven elemental powers. See the seven souls, etc. As well known to every Hindu, this same constellation represents in India the seven rishis, and as such is called Riksha and Chitra Sikandinas. End of note. Like alone produces like. The earth gives man his body, the gods dhyanis his five inner principles, the psychic shadow, of which those gods are often the animating principle. Spirit Atman is one and indiscrete. It is not in the Tiao. For what is the Tiao? The frequent allusion to it in the Book of the Dead contains a mystery. Tiao is the path of the night sun, the inferior hemisphere, or the infernal regions of the Egyptians, placed by them on the concealed side of the moon. The human being, in their esotericism, came out from the moon, a triple mystery, astronomical, physiological, and psychical at once. He crossed the whole cycle of existence and then returned to his birthplace before issuing from it again. Thus the defunct is shown arriving in the west, receiving his judgment before Osiris, resurrecting as the god Horus, and circling round the sidereal heavens, which is an allegorical assimilation to Ra, the sun, then having crossed the Nut, the celestial abyss, returning once more to Chiao, the assimilation to Osiris, who, as the god of life and reproduction, inhabits the moon. Plutarch, Isis and Osiris, chapter 43, shows the Egyptians celebrating a festival called the ingress of Osiris into the moon. In chapter 41, life is promised after death, and the renovation of life is placed under the patronage of Osiris Lunus, because the moon was the symbol of life renewals or reincarnations, owing to its growth, waning, dying, and reappearance every month. In the Dankmue, chapter 4, verse 5, it is said, O Osiris Lunus, that renews to thee thy renewal. And Sapphic says to Seti, Marietzabidas, plate 51, Thou renewest thyself as the god Lunus, when a babe. It is still better explained in the Louvre papyrus, P. Pierre, Études égyptologiques. Couplings and conceptions abound when he, Osiris Lunus, is seen in heaven on that day. Says Osiris, O soul stars, open me to Chiao for Osiris I will issue by day to do what I have to do amongst the living. Book of the Dead, chapter 2, that is, to produce conceptions. Osiris was, quote, God manifest in generation, unquote, because the ancients knew far better than the moderns the real occult influences of the lunar body upon the mysteries of conception. Note: in the oldest systems we find the moon always male. Thus Soma is, with the Hindus, a kind of sidereal Don Juan, a king and the father, albeit illegitimate, of Buddha, wisdom, which relates to occult knowledge, a wisdom gathered through a thorough acquaintance with lunar mysteries, including those of sexual generation. See Holy of Holies. End of note. Later on, when the moon became connected with female goddesses, with Diana, Isis, Artemis, Juno, etc., that connection was due to a thorough knowledge of physiology and female nature, physical as much as psychic. Note on female goddesses. If instead of being taught in Sunday schools useless lessons from the Bible, the armies of the ragged and the poor were taught astrology, and so far at any rate as the occult properties of the moon and its hidden influences on generation are concerned, then there would be little need to fear increase of the population, nor to resort to the questionable literature of the Malthusians for its arrest. For it is the moon and her conjunction that regulate conceptions, and every astrologer in India knows it. During the previous and the present races, at least at the beginning of this one, those who indulged in marital relations during certain lunar phases that made those relations sterile were regarded as sorcerers and sinners. But even now those sins of old, based on the occult knowledge and the abuse of it, would appear preferable to the crimes of today, which are perpetrated because of the complete ignorance of and disbelief in all such occult influences. End of note. But primarily, the sun and the moon were the only visible and, so to say, tangible by their effects, psychic and physiological deities, the Father and the Son, while space and air in general, or that expanse of heaven called Nut by the Egyptians, was the concealed spirit or breath of the two. These Father and Son were interchangeable in their functions and worked harmoniously together in their effects upon terrestrial nature and humanity. Hence they were regarded as one, though two in personified entities. They were both males, and both had a distinct and also collaborative work in the causative generation of humanity, so much from the astronomical and cosmic standpoints viewed and expressed in symbolical language, which became in our last races theological and dogmatic. But behind this veil of cosmic and astrological symbols, there were the occult mysteries of anthropography and the primeval genesis of man. And in this, no knowledge of symbols, or even the key to the post-Diluvian symbolical language of the Jews, will or can help save only with reference to that which was laid down in national scriptures for exoteric uses, the sum of which, however cleverly veiled, was only the smallest portion of the real primitive history of each people, often relating, moreover, as in the Hebrew scriptures, merely to the terrestrial human, not divine life of that nation. That psychic and spiritual element belonged to mystery and initiation. There were things never recorded in scrolls but as in Central Asia, on rocks and in subterranean crypts. Nevertheless, there was a time when the whole world was of one lip and of one knowledge, and man knew more of his origin than he does now, and thus he knew that the sun and moon, however large a part they do play in the constitution, growth, and development of the human body, were not the direct causative agents of his appearance on earth, these agents being, in truth, the living and intelligent powers which the occultists call diankochans. As to this, a very learned admirer of the Jewish esotericism tells us that the Kabbalah says expressly that Elohim is a general abstraction, what we call in mathematics a constant coefficient, or a general function, entering into all construction, not particular, that is, by the general ratio 1 to 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, the astrodianic and Elohistic figures. To this the Eastern occultist replies, "Quite so. It is an abstraction to our physical senses. To our spiritual perceptions, however, and to our inner spiritual eye, the Elohim or Dianis are no more an abstraction than our soul and spirit are to us. Reject the one and you reject the other, since that which is the surviving entity in us is partly the direct emanation from, and partly those celestial entities themselves. One thing is sure. The Jews were perfectly acquainted with sorcery and various maleficent forces, but with the exception of some of their great prophets and seers like Daniel and Ezekiel, Enoch belonging to a far distant race, and not to any nation, but to all, as a generic character, they knew little of, nor would they deal with, the real divine occultism, their national character being averse to anything which had no direct bearing upon their own ethnical, tribal, and individual benefits, witness their own prophets and the curses thundered by them against a, quote, stiff-necked race, unquote. But even the Kabbalah plainly shows the direct relation between the Sephiroth, or Elohim, and men. Therefore, when it is proved to us that the Cabalistic identification of Jehovah with Bina, a female Sephiroth, has still another, a sub-occult meaning in it, then and then only the occultist will be ready to pass the palm of perfection to the Kabbalist. Until then, it is asserted that, as Jehovah is in the abstract sense of a one living God, a single number, a metaphysical figment, and a reality only when put in his proper place as an emanation and a Sephiroth, we have a right to maintain that the Zohar, as witnessed by the Book of Numbers at any rate, gave out originally before the Christian Kabbalist had disfigured it, and still gives out the same doctrine that we do, that is, it makes man emanate not from one celestial man, but from a septenary group of celestial men or angels, just as in Pymando, the thought divine. Stanza 7 continued. 3. When the one becomes two, the threefold appears. When the one becomes two, the threefold appears, to wit, when the one eternal drops its reflection into the region of manifestation, that reflection, the ray, differentiates the water of space, or in the words of the Book of the Dead, chaos ceases through the effulgence of the ray of primordial light, dissipating total darkness by the help of the great magic power of the word of the central sun. Chaos becomes male-female and water incubated through light, and the threefold being issues as its firstborn. Osiris-Ptah, or Ra, creates his own limbs, like Brahma, by creating the gods destined to personify his phases during the cycle. 17.4. The Egyptian Ra, issuing from the deep, is the divine universal soul in its manifested aspect, and so is Narayana, the Purusha, concealed in Akasha and present in Aether. This is the metaphysical explanation, and refers to the very beginning of evolution, or, as we should rather say, of theogony. The meaning of the stanza, when explained from another standpoint in its reference to the mystery of man and his origin, is still more difficult to comprehend. In order to form a clear conception of what is meant by the one becoming two, and then being transformed into the threefold, the student has to make himself thoroughly acquainted with what we call rounds. If he refers to esoteric Buddhism, the first attempt to sketch out an approximate outline of archaic cosmogony, he will find that by round is meant the serial evolution of nascent material nature of the 7 globes of our chain, with their mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms, man being there included in the latter and standing at the head of it, during the whole period of a life cycle. Note: several inimical critics are anxious to prove that no 7 principles of man nor septenary constitution of our chain were taught in our early volume, Isis Unveiled. Though in that work the doctrine could only be hinted at, there are many passages, nevertheless, in which the septenary constitution of both man and chain is openly mentioned. Speaking of the Elohim in Volume 2, page 420, it is said, "They remain over the 7th heaven, or spiritual world, for it is they who, according to the Cabalists, formed in succession the 6th material world, or rather attempt at worlds, that preceded our own, which, they say, is the 7th. Our globe is, of course, upon the diagram representing the chain, the 7th and the lowest, though, as the evolution on these globes is cyclic, it is the 4th in descending the arc of matter." And again on page 367, volume 2, it is written, "In the Egyptian notions, as in those of all other faiths founded on philosophy, man was not merely a union of soul and body. He was a trinity when spirit was added to it, of body, and besides, that doctrine made him consist of body, astral form or shadow, the animal soul, the higher soul, and terrestrial intelligence, and the 6th principle, etc., etc., the 7th, spirit." So clearly are those principles mentioned, that even in the index one finds on page 683 6 principles of man, the 7th being the synthesis of the 6, and not a principle but a ray of the absolute all, in strict truth. End of note. The latter would be called by the Brahmins a day of Brahma. It is, in short, one revolution of the wheel or planetary chain, which is composed of 7 globes or 7 separate wheels, in another sense this time. When evolution has run downward into matter, from planet A to planet G or Z, as the Western students call it, it is one round. In the middle of the 4th revolution, which is our present, quote, round, unquote, evolution has reached its acme of physical development, crowned its work with a perfect physical man, and from this point begins its work spiritward. All this needs a little repetition, as it is well explained in esoteric Buddhism. That which was hardly touched upon, and of which the little that was said has misled many, is the origin of man, and it is upon this that a little more light may now be thrown, just enough to make the stanza more comprehensible, as the process will be fully explained only in its legitimate place in Book 2. Now every quote round, unquote, on the descending scale, is but a repetition in a more concrete form of the round which preceded it, as every globe down to our 4th sphere, the actual Earth, is a grosser and more material copy of the more shadowy sphere which precedes it in the successive order on the 3 higher planes. See a diagram in stanza 6. Commentary 6. On its way upwards on the ascending arc, evolution spiritualizes and etherealizes, so to speak, the general nature of all, bringing it on to a level with the plane on which the twin globe on the opposite side is placed. The result being that when the seventh globe is reached, in whatever round, the nature of everything that is evolving returns to the condition it was in at its starting point, plus, every time, a new and superior degree in the states of consciousness. Thus it becomes clear that the origin of man, so-called, on this our present round or life cycle on this planet, must occupy the same place in the same order, save details based on local conditions and time, as in the preceding round. Again, it must be explained and remembered that, as the work of each round is said to be apportioned to a different group of so-called creators or architects, so is that of every globe. That is, it is under the supervision and guidance of special, quote, builders, unquote, and, quote, watchers, unquote, the various Diankochans. The group of the hierarchy which is commissioned to, quote, create, unquote, men is a special group, then. Yet it evolved a shadowy man in this cycle just as a higher and still more spiritual group evolved him in the third round. Note, creation is an incorrect word to use, as no religion, not even the sect of the Vishishta Advaitis in India, one which anthropomorphizes even Parabrahman, believes in creation out of nihil, as Christians and Jews do, but in evolution out of pre-existing materials. End of note. But as it is the sixth on the downward scale of spirituality, the last and seventh being the terrestrial spirits, the elementals, which gradually form, build, and condense his physical body, this sixth group evolves no more than the future man's shadowy form, a filmy, hardly visible, transparent copy of themselves. It becomes the task of the fifth hierarchy, the mysterious beings that preside over the constellation Copernicus, Makara or crocodile in India as in Egypt, to inform the empty and ethereal animal form and make of it the rational man. This is one of those subjects upon which very little may be said to the general public. It is a mystery truly, but only to him who is prepared to reject the existence of intellectual and conscious spiritual beings in the universe, limiting full consciousness to man alone, and that only as a function of the brain. Many are those among the spiritual entities who have incarnated bodily in man since the beginning of his appearance, and who, for all that, still exist as independently as they did before in the infinitudes of space. To put it more clearly, the invisible entity may be bodily present on Earth without abandoning, however, its status and functions in the supersensus regions. If this needs explanation, we can do no better than remind the reader of like cases in spiritualism, though such cases are very rare, at least as regards the nature of the entity incarnating or taking temporary possession of a medium. Note: the so-called spirits that may occasionally possess themselves of the bodies of mediums are not the monads or higher principles of disembodied personalities. Such a, quote, spirit, unquote, can only be either an elementary or a nirmanakaya. End of note. Just as certain persons, men and women, revert into parallel cases among living persons, whether by virtue of a peculiar organization or through the power of acquired mystic knowledge, can be seen in their, quote, double, unquote, in one place while the body is many miles away, so the same thing can occur in the case of superior beings. Man, philosophically considered, is, in his outward form, simply an animal, hardly more perfect than his pithecod-like ancestor of the third round. He is a living body, not a living being, since the realization of existence, the ego sum, necessitates self-consciousness, and an animal can only have direct consciousness or instinct. This was so well understood by the ancients that the Kabbalists even made of soul and body two lives, independent of each other. Note: On page 340 to 351, Genesis of the Soul, in The New Aspects of Life, the author states the Cabalistic teaching. They held that, functionally, spirit and matter of corresponding opacity and density tended to coalesce, and that the resultant created spirits, in the disembodied state, were constituted on a scale in which the differing opacities and transparencies of elemental or uncreated spirits were reproduced, and that these spirits in the disembodied state attracted, appropriated, digested, and assimilated elemental spirit and elemental matter whose condition was conformed to their own. They therefore taught that there was a wide difference in the condition of created spirits, and that in the intimate association between the spirit world and the world of matter, the more opaque spirits in the disembodied state were drawn toward the more dense parts of the material world, and therefore tended toward the center of the earth, where they found the conditions most suited to their state, while the more transparent spirits passed into the surrounding aura of the planet, the most rarefied finding their home in its satellite." Unquote. This relates exclusively to our elementary spirits, and has naught to do with either the planetary, sidereal, cosmic, or inter-etheric intelligent forces or angels, as they are termed by the Roman Church. The Jewish Kabbalists, especially the practical occultists who dealt with ceremonial magic, busied themselves solely with the spirits of the planets and the elementals, so-called. Therefore, this covers only a portion of the esoteric teaching. End of note. The soul, whose body vehicle is the astral, ethereal substantial envelope, could die, and man be still living on earth. That is, the soul could free itself from and quit the tabernacle for various reasons, such as insanity, spiritual and physical depravity, etc. Note the possibility of the, quote, soul, unquote, that is, the eternal spiritual ego, dwelling in the unseen worlds, while its body goes on living on earth, is a preeminently occult doctrine, especially in Chinese and Buddhist philosophy. See Isis Unveiled, Volume 1, page 602, for an illustration. Many are the soulless men among us, for the occurrence is found to take place in wicked materialists, as well as in persons who advance in holiness and never turn back. See the same source and also Isis, Volume 2, page 369. End of note. Therefore, that which living men, initiates, can do, the dhyanis, who have no physical body to hamper them, can do still better. This was the belief of the antediluvians, and is fast becoming that of modern intellectual society in spiritualism, besides the Greek and Roman churches, which teach the ubiquity of their angels. The Zoroastrians regarded their Amshaspends as dual entities, theos, applying this duality in esoteric philosophy at any rate to all the spiritual and invisible denizens of the numberless worlds in space which are visible to our eye. In a note of Damascus, 6th century, on the Chaldean oracles, we have a triple evidence of the universality of this doctrine, for he says, "In these oracles, the 7 cosmic crateras of the world pillars, mentioned likewise by St. Paul, are double, one set being commissioned to rule the superior worlds, the spiritual and the sidereal, and the other to guide and watch over the worlds of matter." Such is also the opinion of Jamblichus, who makes an evident distinction between the archangels and the, quote, archontes, unquote. See De Mysteries, section 2, chapter 3. The above may be applied, of course, to the distinction made between the degrees or orders of spiritual beings, and it is in this sense that Roman Catholic Church tries to interpret and teach the difference. For while the archangels are in her teaching divine and holy, their doubles are denounced by her as devils. Note, this identity between the spirit and its material double, in man it is the reverse, explains still better the confusion alluded to already in this work, made in the names and individualities, as well as the numbers of the rishis and the prajapatis, especially between those of the Satya Yuga and the Mahabharata period. It also throws additional light on what the secret doctrine teaches with regard to the root and the seed manus. See Book 2 on the primitive manus of humanity. Not only those progenitors of our mankind, but every human being, we are taught, has its prototype in the spiritual spheres, which prototype is the highest essence of his seventh principle. Thus the 7 manus become 14, the root manu being the prime cause, and the seed manu its effect. When the latter reach from Satya Yuga, the first stage, to the heroic period, these manus or rishis become 21 in number. End of note. But the word ferua is not to be understood in this sense, for it means simply the reverse or the opposite side of some attribute or quality. Thus, when the occultist says that a demon is the learning of God, evil, the reverse of the medal, he does not mean 2 separate actualities, but the 2 aspects or facets of the same unity. Now the best man living would appear side by side with an archangel, as described in theology, a fiend. Hence a certain reason to depreciate a lower double, immersed far deeper in matter than its original. But there is still as little cause to regard them as devils, as this is precisely what the Roman Catholics maintain against all reason and logic. The 3 are linked into one, and it is our thread, Ulanu, the heart of the man-plant, called Saptaparna. The concluding sentence of this sloka shows how archaic is the belief and the doctrine that man is sevenfold in his constitution. The thread of being which animates man and passes through all his personalities or rebirths on this earth, an allusion to Sutratma, the thread on which, moreover, all his, quote, spirits, unquote, are strung, is spun from the essence of the threefold, the fourfold, and the fivefold, which contain all the preceding. Panshatika, agreeably to Bhagavad Purana, Volume 5, Chapter 20, verse 25 to 28, is one of the 7 Kumaras who go to Svetadvipa to worship Vishnu. We shall see further on what connection there is between the, quote, celibate, unquote, and chaste sons of Brahma who refuse to multiply, and terrestrial mortals. Meanwhile, it is evident that the man-plant, Saptaparna, thus refers to the 7 principles, and man is compared to the 7-leaved plant of this name, so sacred among Buddhists. For further details as to Saptaparna and the importance of the number 7 in occultism, as well as in symbology, the reader is referred to Part 2, Book 2 on Symbolism, sections on Saptaparna, the septenary in the Vedas, etc., etc. Note on the 7-leaved plant of this name. The Egyptian allegory in the Book of the Dead, already mentioned, the hymn that relates to the reward of the soul, is as suggestive of our septenary doctrine as it is poetical. The deceased is allotted a piece of land in the field of Onuru, wherein the manes, the deified shades of the dead, glean, as the harvest they have sown by their actions in life, the corn 7 cubits high, which grows in a territory divided into 14 and 7 portions. This corn is the food on which they live and prosper, or that will kill them in Amenti, the realm of which the Anru field is a domain. For, as said in the hymn, see chapter 32, verse 9, the deceased is either destroyed therein or becomes pure spirit for the eternity, in consequence of the 7 times 77 lives past or to be passed on earth. The idea of the corn reaped as the fruit of our actions is very graphic. End of note. The 7 continued. 4. It is the root that never dies, the 3-tongued flame of the 4 wicks. Note, the 3-tongued flame of the 4 wicks corresponds to the 4 unities and the 3 binaries of the sephirothal tree. See commentary in stanza 6. End of note. The 3-tongued flame that never dies is the immortal spiritual triad, the Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, the fruition of the latter assimilated by the first 2 after every terrestrial life. The 4 wicks that go out and are extinguished are the 4 lower principles, including the body. I am the 3-wicked flame, and my wicks are immortal, says the defunct. I enter into the domain of Sikkim, the god whose arm shows the seed of action produced by the disembodied soul, and I enter the region of the flames who have destroyed their adversaries, that is, got rid of the sin-creating 4 wicks. See Chapter 1, 7, Book of the Dead, and the Mysteries of Rostan. The wicks are the sparks that roar from the 3-tongued flame, their upper triad, shot out by the 7, their flame. The beams and sparks of one moon reflected in the running waves of all the rivers of the earth. Buni or Prithvi. Note: useless to repeat again that the terms given here are Sanskrit translations, for the original terms, unknown and unheard of in Europe, would only puzzle the reader more and serve no useful purpose. End of note. Just as myriads of bright sparks dance on the waters of an ocean above which one and the same moon is shining, so our evanescent personalities, the elusive envelopes of the immortal monad ego, twinkle and dance on the waves of Maya. They last and appear, as the queen of the night radiates her luster on the running waters of life, the period of a manvantara. And then they disappear, the beams, symbols of our eternal spiritual egos alone surviving, re-emerged in and being, as they were before, one with the Mother Source. Next chapter will be stanza 7 continued and concluded, slokas 5 through 7.